So, what is happening to demand for precious metals in the energy sector? How you doing, everybody? Welcome to Empire Precious Metals. If you're new to the channel, I am not a financial advisor. I am a guy talking about precious metals and collectibles, so make sure you blast that like button, get that subscribe button also smashed. Make sure you get the bell notification click so that way you get updated with any new content. Today I'm talking about silver, gold, and uranium, and the demand for these commodities when it comes to the energy sector. Now, we know a few months back that President Biden had indicated that there is going to be this green initiative, and we're looking at a major demand for silver in the energy sector. There's going to be a lot that's going to be invested in solar. And here we see on Sprott.com, and I'll include the link to this down below. We're seeing what's happening here. Silver's pivotal role as an industrial metal. We're seeing that silver has climbed significantly. Look at it at 48% of the overall pie here. Down here, we're seeing industrial buyers driving more than 50% of the silver demand. Also, we're seeing a boost in the electric vehicles market, and I'm just summarizing this for all of you. And you can go through all this, pushing the solar panel development program, expanding 5G cellular networks. So we are seeing all of this growth in the implications for the supply and demand of silver. It's going to be quite significant. Now, there's not a lot of talk about gold in industrial metals and industrial uses, but we are seeing that gold is used for quite a bit of different things, right? We know right here, and I'll also include the link to this down below, a bit of gold history down here, talking about that jewelry is the primary use of gold. Right here, financial gold coinage, bullion, backing of various currencies, although we know that stopped with the dollar when Nixon took us off of the gold standard. Use of gold in electronics, uses of gold in computers, uses of gold in dentistry. So we do see a lot of uses of gold, but more so with silver, with everything that's going to be coming up. But what about uranium? I do have an interview with an expert who is going to talk about a tremendous opportunity that I really do think that you guys should take a moment to listen to. I actually am going to be investing in this company. That doesn't mean that you should be following what I am doing. Like I said, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just a guy in talking about precious metals and collectibles. So, you're going to have to do your own due diligence, but I do think that this opportunity is very exciting. Some of the featured companies on my channel have performed tremendously well with their stocks since being on my channel. So you definitely want to do your research. So why don't we just jump right to it? I am here with Amir Adnani, CEO and president of Uranium Energy Corp. Amir, how's it going?
It's going great. Nice to connect with you.
I have a bunch of questions I kind of wanted to ask you. One of the things I wanted to ask you is kind of about uranium and how it's really being embraced by millennials, and it's really become like a retail story for the first time in like 15 years. What is your belief in terms of the contribution of this fascination?
It's got to be about concerns around the climate. For the first time in at least the 15 years that I've been involved directly with the uranium business as an entrepreneur, as a CEO, we have this convergence of incredible concerns from how we're going to deal with emissions, how we're going to decarbonize our world, reduce global temperatures. And so that, coupled with the fact that you've got electrification, for example, of our transportation system, with more and more electric vehicles being placed on the roads, and expectations of so much growth in that area, that demand for electricity alone is expected to double over the next 30 years. So you converge these issues together, right? These mega trends of decarbonization and electrification. And it brings everyone back to kind of asking realistic questions about, can we rely entirely on renewable sources of power generation, wind and solar? Mm-hmm. The answer is no. And you've got you got policymakers, you've got climate scientists. We're all coming to the same conclusions, which is, okay, look, if we're going to wean off of hydrocarbons, if we're going to eliminate coal and reduce dependence on gas, for example, or any source of major power generation that produces emissions, if we're going to do all of that, then we can't go 100% renewables, because renewables just can't support that. Renewables don't have the right base load factor. They work 25 to 30% of the time during a 24/7 cycle. And nuclear power, by comparison, generates power 95% of the time around the 24/7 cycle. It's got the highest baseload capacity factor. And so you combine those two elements together, renewables along with nuclear power, and it's become this sort of winning formula so far in terms of resonating with millennials, with whatever your generation is. I mean, as long as you're a human being who's alive and is sensible, irrespective of generation, you come to that conclusion that this works vis-a-vis what the goals are in the world today. And again, the reality is that we need electricity, and we need to kind of meet the needs of more electricity demand while decarbonizing at the same time.
That makes sense. You know, and one thing too, I mean, you know, you see the nuclear power plants and everything, and a lot of people don't necessarily know where all the nuclear energy is actually used. They think that it's mainly just for nuclear power, obviously, but they don't really know in what facets of their everyday life that it's actually helping them with their everyday life. So, for example, you know, what countries are really using nuclear energy, and for like what purpose would you say is the main reason that nuclear energy is critical?
Well, just take the U.S. And so let's just start right here. And it's very simple. 1 in every 5 homes is getting its electricity from nuclear power. You turn on the light switch, you charge your iPhone, you turn on your laptop. It's about generating electricity. That's what nuclear power plants do. And 20% of electricity generation in the U.S. is coming from nuclear power. So that's 1 in every 5 homes. In countries like France, it's as high as 70% of electricity generation that's coming from nuclear power. Now, if you take it look at, and again, going back to the carbon lens, if you say, well, what percentage of electricity in the U.S. is emission-free electricity, and what source of power generates the highest amount of electricity generation that's emission-free? That's nuclear power. It's the largest source of emission-free electricity generation in the U.S. So again, it's whether you're charging your Tesla or electric vehicle or mining Bitcoin, all these things require electricity. Where do we get it from? Nuclear power, renewables, hydro, gas-fired plants, coal-fired plants. Those are all the sources of electricity generation. Now, it is starting to become also. There are other applications. So, for example, when NASA wants to send a spaceship to travel towards Mars, or as SpaceX wants to do it, those spaceships are powered by small modular reactors or micro reactors that are basically providing the energy for space travel. There is uranium and nuclear medicine that's used basically in medical devices or medical imaging. There's the nuclear Navy. So all the aircraft carriers and submarines in the United States Navy are powered by micro reactors that utilize nuclear fuel or uranium for long distance travel. And again, it's the ability of nuclear power to generate huge amount of energy from very little fuel that makes it ideal for, let's say, space travel or long haul missions that the nuclear Navy might have.
So let me ask you then, a lot of people know that uranium is mined. Where is it typically found, and how big of a sector is it?
So the mining of uranium is somewhat bizarre in the sense that the countries that don't have any nuclear power plants, hence they don't consume any uranium, are the ones that are mining a lot of it. And the countries that consume a lot of uranium don't mine any of it. Right. And so the supply chain is completely like kind of illogical in how it's laid out. So the number one country in the world that produces almost 40% of global supply. So they're like a single nation OPEC, comparing them to, let's say, the oil industry. That country is Kazakhstan in Central Asia, bordering Russia and China. And they're producing 40% of global uranium supplies. Meanwhile, does Kazakhstan consume any uranium for power generation? The answer is no.
That's
and you
incredible.
say, well, who's the largest consumer of uranium? Oh, it's the United States. The US consumes more uranium than any other nation to power 94 reactors in this country
Right.
that generate, as we talked about earlier, 20% of electricity, one in every 5 homes. Yet, we mine no uranium in the US. So the US is the world's biggest consumer, doesn't mine any. Kazakhstan is the world's biggest producer, doesn't consume any. And that right there is like, let's say your biggest consumer and your biggest supplier. You go down the food chain, and on the consumption side, just about every major economy, be it China, in Europe, UK, France, and India, they're building nuclear reactors. South Korea, Russia, they have nuclear fleets, so they consume uranium. They're building new nuclear reactors. In the US, where new reactors are being built, are very interesting projects, like one that was just announced 2 weeks ago. So 2 weeks ago, you had a really fascinating partnership, in a way, if you can call it a partnership, where Bill Gates, who's backing this company called TerraPower, that's focusing on building small reactors, these small reactors that are 1/10 the size of a traditional reactor. So you can build them in less populated or less population dense areas. He's partnering up with Warren Buffett, his pal, where Warren Buffett's company used to have a coal-fired plant. On that site, they're going to build a new nuclear reactor in the state of Wyoming.
Wow.
So you got the state of Wyoming teaming up in a way with Bill Gates' TerraPower, teaming up with Warren Buffett's power company. They're going to build a small modular reactor there. This was announced just a few weeks ago. It's super interesting, in my opinion, because it shows a whole new kind of area and an area for growth for for nuclear power. And you see the players involved, the cast of characters involved, Bill Gates of the world, Warren Buffett's of the world. It's super fascinating. It's exciting. And it's a new area for innovation and development in the US. And continuing back on this question about where does the supply come from? So we talked about Kazakhstan. There's a lot of uranium that's mined in countries like Australia, in Africa, countries like Namibia are sources of uranium mining.
Is it just not found here?
I was going to get back to the US at the very end.
Okay.
Despite the fact that we currently have no uranium mining in the US, uranium mining originally started out in the US. It was one of the first countries to be explored for uranium. There's been more historic exploration and mining in the US than any other country in the world, going back to the 1950s and all the way on. And what happened to the mining of uranium in the US, which was a massive industry, there were over 25,000 people employed in the uranium mining industry in the United States. Today, it's down to like 300 people that are just looking after idled projects, okay? Hoping for a big turnaround. And we'll talk about where I think there's a lot of growth. But we've seen this industry in the US go from 25,000 people employed in it down to 300. It's gone from being, the US used to be the world's biggest producer of uranium in the 1970s, 1980s. Today, it produces nothing. And you say, well, what happened? Okay, well, the Cold War happened. And when the Cold War ended in the early 90s, the US decided to sign a treaty with Russia. It was called the Highly Enriched Uranium Treaty, where they took old Soviet-era warheads, the warheads that used to point towards the US were taken and they were dismantled. And they took the uranium, the highly enriched uranium that was in these warheads, and they said, we're going to get rid of these things. We're going to blend them down and we're going to use them for power generation in the US. This became a 2 to 3 decade long agreement that supplied uranium to the US utilities and the US market from old Soviet era warheads. It caused the uranium prices to really drop for a long time. It really drove a lot of uranium miners out of business in the US.
Right.
And we're kind of at a point today now where the Cold War's gone. The U.S. has a lot of disagreements with Russia over geopolitical issues. It seems kind of crazy that from a supply chain point of view, and you consider what we just lived through over the last year, where supply chains matter when you have a crisis. You have a pandemic, and everyone's all of a sudden wondering, where do we get our vaccines from? Where do we get our masks from? Where do we get our ventilators from? And it takes a crisis to start asking supply chain questions, right? Otherwise, you don't ask these questions. And if we have an energy crisis, if we have a crisis with uranium, where let's say somehow uranium can't come from Kazakhstan to the US, those 94 reactors are going to be in trouble. All of a sudden, 20% of US electricity generation is going to be in trouble. And that's the reason why there is a lot of focus right now on saying, hey, let's get US uranium mining going again, because it's important to have a domestic and local supply chain. And this all kind of boils down to a certain initiative that's underway right now in Washington, D.C. It's got bipartisan support to try to build a U.S. government strategic supply or reserves of uranium to basically deter against a crisis issue. And I think, honestly, and this is what I'm so focused on as an entrepreneur for the last 15 years, I think the U.S. is one of the best places to look for uranium. I think there's a lot of potential here that's been overlooked. That potential has been untapped because no one's been looking for uranium here over the last decade. There's all this growth in the sector because of what's happening in terms of nuclear power growth and the reasons we talked about that earlier. So I really think that the U.S., if we anticipate what could happen over the next decade, I think we go from being a country that produces no uranium to producing increasingly more uranium in the coming years. And I think it can play a big role on even a global scale.
Wow. I mean, to your point, I mean, it makes perfect sense too, because like you said, supply chains and weaknesses being exposed with the pandemic, and you're saying 90%, 95% of those, or 94 of those nuclear reactors that we have, they're just going to be sitting there with no uranium for them. We're going to be in big trouble. And I would agree with you too. It seems like the solution would be to open it back up here in the United States and get that going again. Think about the number of jobs that would bring, and just would probably just explode that whole entire, sector here within the United States. And to what you were talking about earlier with coal, I mean, we all know that, Trump was a big supporter of the coal industry. Do you see any difference between Trump and Biden with regards to nuclear?
I don't. There is, in fact, bipartisan support for nuclear energy in the US today. There's bipartisan support for the US Uranium Reserve, which is a program that was recommended during the Trump administration in his last year. It was culmination of 3 years of studies by the Department of Commerce and Department of Energy in the US that concluded that there is supply chain vulnerabilities when it comes to nuclear power and the fuel for nuclear power in the US. There was a study that came out by a group called the Nuclear Fuel Working Group, which was a White House initiated group. And this group, April of last year, basically released a study. It's on the Department of Energy website, just talking about the fact that nuclear power was important to national security interest of the U.S., that the U.S. had fallen behind Russia and China when it comes to building nuclear reactors globally, having access to nuclear fuel and supply chains. And it made a number of recommendations for addressing these issues, including building a U.S. uranium reserve, a $1.5 billion program over 10 years. Mm-hmm. And when the Biden administration came in, they didn't back away from these points. In fact, they've continued these points. New Energy Secretary Granholm has spoken very positively and favorably towards supporting the nuclear fleet and nuclear power, and continuing with the development and funding and launch of the U.S. Uranium Reserve. I would argue one of the only industries or topics in Washington, D.C. today where there's bipartisan support is nuclear power, which is rare, right? At a time of like historic high disagreements on everything, right? And how partisanship is out there so visibly. This is a sector and a theme that really enjoys a rare bipartisan support. And frankly, it's the first time in the history of the Democratic Party that they've included support for nuclear power officially in the party platform. So I think this is a positive takeaway, and it's probably one that's not going to get media attention because media doesn't want to focus on something with, trust or amicable agreements,
No,
right?
no, there's nothing fun to watch there. If everybody's getting along and passing bills that are, both parties are working on. No, there's no drama there.
Exactly.
So let me ask you something about your company, right? You're the founder of the publicly traded uranium company on the New York Stock Exchange. First of all, do you own shares yourself? And if so, if you don't mind me asking, how many do you have?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the founder of the company. I've been at it for 15 years as the CEO, and during this time, I've demonstrated that I've got thick skin in the game. I'm the largest individual shareholder of the company. I'm a top 10 shareholder of the company. Between various equity holdings that I have, it's up to I think it's up to just above 5 million shares that was disclosed in the proxy, including options and restricted share units, et cetera, that was just disclosed in our proxy that was filed.
Wow.
And so I've demonstrated again for a long time that there's that alignment with our shareholder, that we have skin in the game, that I have skin in the game. And that's what you would expect from a founder and someone who's been at it from the get-go.
Sure. Sure. And that's one of the things, too, that a lot of my viewers find very admirable with some of the companies that I speak with, especially when you have the CEO being so vested and involved with the company. It's your baby. And of course you want it to do well and you work tirelessly at it. And so I think that that's an awesome takeaway for the individuals watching this right now. Let me ask you too, your business model. Do you mind explaining a little bit about that?
For 15 years, we've been focused on U.S. uranium, looking at uranium projects in the U.S. and states where there's a history of uranium mining. Texas, Wyoming, Colorado, Arizona. These are the states where there's decades of historical exploration and development and mining of uranium. And so we've gone out and over the 15 years, we've acquired initially databases, historic data of where exploration and mining of uranium took place in these states, then used the data to target and acquire land that is prospective for uranium, was previously site of exploration development. And that by doing that, we've minimized our company's exploration risk.
Right.
We're not just going out there and doing wildcat drilling everywhere. We're very focused and trying to identify past developed or past explored or past producing areas. And so for us, the name of the game was really combine know-how in terms of human capital. So the individuals that we have on our team that I've made a big focus of mine over the 15 years to assemble a team of uranium experts, what's left of uranium expertise in this country. We've assembled individuals that have spent their entire professional careers in uranium exploration, development, mining. Combine that with historical information, then go out there and acquire uranium projects. Today, we have a portfolio of over 20 uranium projects in South Texas and Wyoming's Powder River Basin, in Colorado and in Arizona. We advanced these projects. We became a uranium mining company. We produced uranium in South Texas. We have a uranium processing plant, one of only a handful of such things in the US that's fully permitted and built for uranium processing. What I'm describing to you, not too many companies have done in the last 15 years, because remember, this is a tiny industry.
Right.
It's become marginalized or almost eliminated in the last 15 years, but we've survived it. We've used the downturn of the sector over the last decade to acquire projects on the cheap. We didn't have a lot of competition when we were acquiring projects. We were able to act in a contrarian fashion and assemble a portfolio of over 100 million pounds of uranium in the ground. The processing plant that we acquired, the projects that we acquired when the cycle and the sector was out of favor. Okay, so we were not only able to acquire intelligently using data. But we bought when the sector was out of favor, and again, there wasn't all the positive kind of dynamics around it that we talked earlier in this discussion. And then, so finally, really, the way I would describe Uranium Energy is that we are a U.S.-focused uranium mining company. We have a track record of uranium mining. We produced uranium at our South Texas operations. We had to shut those operations down due to the low uranium price environment of the last decade. Uranium prices are making a big comeback here. And so as the uranium prices continue strengthening, we have a business here at Uranium Energy that has really performed. I mean, you just look at our share price year over year. Over the last year, a year ago, we were trading at just over $1 a share.
I was going to say, today is, what is that, 3 now?
It's almost $3 a share. So the stock's up 200%.
Yeah.
We managed to raise capital and really kind of strengthen our balance sheet. The stock and the company at a balance sheet level today, we have over $110 million of cash and equity and physical holdings. And that's the thing. We've gone out there. Not only do we have uranium properties, uranium mines, a uranium processing plant, we've got the largest inventory position of uranium in a barrel stored right here in the US of any company. We've got close to $75 million of US warehoused uranium, finished product as part of our inventory position. Also in the company's holdings and possession, we have numerous projects that have been already permitted for uranium mining. And permitting uranium mines is very time consuming, it's very expensive, but it's also time consuming. It's not just writing a check and you get a permit. It takes 7 to 10 years to permit a uranium mine.
Oh, wow.
So that is a barrier to entry. If tomorrow there's a rush into the uranium sector and all of a sudden this becomes the latest kind of hot sector to be in,
sure.
Unless you've spent 10 years permitting, you can't mine anything. Even if you show up, if Elon Musk shows up tomorrow with $1 billion check, says, I want to be a uranium miner, he's got to get in line. He's got to wait 10 years to get a permit before he can mine anything. We've already spent the time and the money to be in a position where we have 4 fully permitted uranium projects ready to produce in South Texas and Wyoming. That gives us a very important competitive advantage, which is the first mover advantage.
I was about to say, yeah, you're be first.
That's it. And so we've got not only a sizable portfolio, we've got the largest portfolio of uranium projects that are permitted for production. We have numerous projects. We're not a one-trick pony. Beyond the 4 projects that are fully permitted, there's another 16 projects behind them with development and exploration potential. And again, I think the stars are aligning. It's a great time for us. And the market and the share price over the last year demonstrates that you have globally these trends that are supportive of nuclear power and demonstrate that this doubling the demand for electricity means we're going to need more uranium to power more nuclear reactors to generate more clean and emission-free electricity. And the fact that the supply chains for uranium, which is the fuel to run nuclear reactors, doesn't exist in the US is crazy, absolutely crazy. Something should be done about that.
Sure.
The government is getting geared up to deal with that. They want to buy uranium and stockpile. That's going to incentivize miners like our company to get back into business in a big way. And that's it. Those are all exciting value propositions. And at a time in the world and in the market where everything is trading at an all-time high, you have an asset bubble in everything from cryptocurrencies to lumber. I mean, mind you, lumber prices have come down, but nonetheless, everything's expensive right now, right? Because of what the Fed's been doing with printing over the last decade. And not just, the last decade and the last year.
Sure.
Uranium is an asset class where I can sit here and talk to you about all the fundamental things it's got going for it, yet the uranium price is it's more than half of its decade high. Uranium prices have been as high as $75 over the last decade. Today is at $30. And here's a commodity that you fundamentally need and you consume to generate something that's really useful. That's electricity. So you got a solid supply case, solid demand case. It's a real nuts and bolts commodity.
Absolutely.
Yet at the current price, it is not at an all-time high. It's not at a decade high. It's nowhere near even what it needs to be as an incentive price for uranium miners to make money, which is $50. So even from the $30 per pound level that it's at, it's got to almost double to get to $50 to $60 per pound before miners can increase supply. I think it's one of the most interesting sectors from a value proposition point of view in today's very overvalued world.
Absolutely. It sounds like a tremendous opportunity. Before we wrap up, I did want to ask you about an individual, Spencer Abraham. Who is he?
Spencer Abraham is the former United States Energy Secretary, and previous to that, served in the U.S. Senate, and he is the chairman of Uranium Energy, the company that we're talking about, that I'm the founder and CEO of. So it's an incredible honor for us to really not only talk about having the human capital and the individuals that understand uranium mining, but to have a former energy secretary as the chairman of our company is yet another kind of layer of validation. It's a different type of validation, but it also gives our company credibility with the US government. So as the US government, through the Department of Energy, comes to look to buy uranium for establishing a government strategic stockpile, it's huge credibility to have a former energy secretary as chairman of our company, and really shows that we've got a well-rounded team that understands both the political side of this business, the technical side of this business, and the 15 years that we've invested time, money, and energy building our business, preparing it to have that first mover advantage. That's just irreplaceable.
That's awesome. I got to be honest with you. The entire conversation with you has me very excited for your company. And I actually, as soon as we wrap up, I kid you not, I'm actually going to go onto my E-Trade account and I'm going to pick up some shares of the company, because everything that you're saying, my father, he's in the clean energy sector as well. And so this will probably be the one and only video of my channel that he's going to bother watching. But it sounds like everything is just ready to take off for you and the company. So I'm very excited. Amir Adnani, CEO and president of Uranium Energy Corp, I really appreciate your time. I'm going to put all of the information for your company down below in the description, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it as well, and hopefully we can reconnect soon.
Absolutely. And I would like to quickly thank these elite channel supporters. And if you haven't already become a channel member, please check out the awesome perks and join today. With that, this is Empire Precious Metals. Until next time, long live the Empire.